Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This has been around for a while. I don't even know when it was first released. I want to say 2021. 2021. And it is a vampire novel, which has been making the rounds. A lot of people have been hyping this book on TikTok and BookTube. And I had never heard of Miss Gibson before, but I really got very interested in the idea behind the story. So this is essentially the story of the wife of a very famous, very old vampire, not Dracula. It's important to note that this is not the wives or wife of Dracula. The story begins sometime in the 14th century, so 1300 something. We are not quite sure, because the first date is never actually set. There are some dates and some times that are mentioned, or incidents, events that are mentioned, which make it possible to date certain parts of the story, but mainly we don't know when the story begins. But it does begin with a young woman. We don't know her age. I would say probably around about 17 or 18. And she is lying on a battlefield dying. And this man shows up and he says, well, basically, I can grant you eternal life. And he turns out to be a vampire. He drinks from her and he turns her. And on that very night that she is turned, she takes revenge on the soldiers that have ravaged her village, destroyed her family, and destroyed basically everything and everyone she knows. And she realizes, well, you know, I'm powerful, I'm strong, and she just takes revenge and she feeds from them. And this vampire, takes her to his house, which is a huge mansion, which is in parts a little bit run down and completely devoid of people. He says, well, they either died or ran away. But it looks like it's quite nice on the inside, and basically she starts to live with him, and he and she basically consummate the relationship. The marriage is consummated, and he calls her his wife. And of course she knows exactly what's going on. She knows that he's a vampire, and a very old one too. She realizes how powerful he is when she drinks his blood, and she basically turns into a vampire as well. Vampires in this story are a little bit maybe different from other vampire lore in that they can eat human food and drink human drinks, and they do. It's just that as time passes, and here we're talking about centuries, it tastes less and less, I don't want to say pleasant, but interesting. So it just loses its flavor. So it's more like, I believe, drinking stale water and eating cardboard. But they can imbibe and consume human food. So if they want to pass off as humans, it's possible. There's also reference to blood flowing, to heart beating, to pulsating. So I don't know if it means that they have to consciously make it so, or if it just happens that, you know, the organs are still working. And they also breathe. So basically there is talk about breathing. So I don't know if it means that they actually need the oxygen or if it's just a reflex, because obviously breathing is something that humans simply do. But they are immortal. They do not age. They do not become ill. And so the two of them live in the castle of this vampire, whose name is never revealed, because she does state, you took my name from you, so you shall remain nameless, because he actually calls her Constanta. We never know what she was called as a human. We don't know what her human name was. It's like, you know, she doesn't reveal it. It's not like she says, I don't remember, but she basically just refers to herself as Constanta in the book, in the story, which is basically she's telling her story to the reader. And as time goes by, the two of them go out to hunt, but she's mainly confined to this really big house. But she also realizes that this is something that makes sense because she still needs to gain her strength. And one day a man comes to the house and he's wearing a mask with a very long snout, and he tells the vampire that there's a plague ravaging his lands, and he's got this big mansion and it should be turned into a hospital, and we could house the sick here, we could house the nuns that look after the sick, and so on and so forth. And the vampire is very interested in this whole plague thing, and he says, well, tell me more about it. And then he drains the man dry and kills him, and tells his wife to just pack up everything. She's like, why did you kill him? He's an innocent, he's trying to help people. And he's like, no, when there's a plague, we run. Because I remember the plague in Athens when I was young, and it was devastating, and people will try to blame the plague on someone, and they will blame us, and we are in danger. Which gives us a first grounding in history, because we know that there was a great plague in Athens a couple of centuries BC, which is very well documented in ancient Greek writing and history writing. So we know that this vampire is very old. At this stage, it's now in the 1500s, so about 100 years after she was turned, this plague happens and we now find out that it's somewhere in Eastern Europe, Romania. A plague happened. I didn't verify if this plague actually happened, but it could have happened in the 15th century, no problem at all. But if he remembers a plague that happened in a couple of centuries before Christ, then he's already 1700 years old, if not older. And the two of them pack up and they travel and they leave and they go to Vienna, where they basically stay in a townhouse. He's got a lot of money, of course. Vampires are usually rich. And it's beginning to, to turn into a very toxic relationship, in that he's very controlling of her. He doesn't want her to go out on her own. He tries to confine her to the house. He's also very jealous. And she's also somebody who basically has decided only to feed off people. And whenever they feed, they usually kill as well. Of villains, of bad people, like the wife beaters and the terrible magistrates, that the tax collectors that are mean and that kind of thing. So she really is more like the paladin of vampires, whereas he will drain whoever he finds interesting. And then the siege of Vienna happens, and the Turks are at the front gates, and he decides to leave again. He says, this is going to be dangerous. But in the meantime, she also starts snooping after him, I guess. So first of all, she's known for a good while that he's been investigating or studying people, but also vampires, to understand how vampires tick, how we humans are related to them. Of course, he knows how vampires are sired. He also tells her that she would not be able to sire one because she's too weak. Maybe this will come in time, but he's very, very strong, and that's why he can sire her, and he could sire others if he so chose. So he's kind of like a scientist. So he's basically and he also has like scientific instruments like astrolabes and those kinds of things. So he's interested in this kind of thing, and she finds that he's also corresponding with people across Europe, and she also finds out that in the past there were other wives, there were other husbands, there were other lovers, because she finds letters from him to them and from them to him. So she finds out she's not his only wife, and by no means the first. So that's kind of, problematic for her also, because she's wondering what happened to them. And then basically they leave Vienna and take a coach to someplace else. And she says, well, where are we going? He says, well, we're going to go to Spain. And because I've got a friend there. And she's like, who have you got there? And they go to this mansion, and it turns out that there is an aristocratic lady named Magdalena who he's been corresponding with. And she's a very interesting character. Unfortunately, it's never really fleshed out. She basically got rid of her father to inherit, and she's ruling whichever, I don't know if it's a, I don't know, duchy or whatever, she rules with an iron fist in a way, but also very diplomatically, intelligently. But she's also corresponding with people around Europe, like the aristocracy, and advising them. And she will continue to do so throughout the book, but it's never really fleshed out, which is a little bit of a pity, but I guess it would also have detracted from the main story. But it's very interesting that she's actually this political mastermind who keeps advising first royalty and later then parliaments and prime ministers, and towards the end she actually, once everything is over, starts to study politics in Italy. So he basically turns her as well, and it's always been his intention. And he's also been telling her about Constanta, and he's been trying to set up this threesome between the three of them. And he keeps telling Constanta, you'll always be my wife, blah, 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 and she's your sister. And he's expanding his household, as it were. And Constanta does fall in love with Magdalena, and vice versa. And of course, they both love him. And so life continues. They move across Europe from here to there. And then, but it's always this, they are confined. He controls where they go. He controls who they meet. So it's a very toxic relationship, and they don't have any freedom. So he, at the end of the day, makes the decisions where they move, when they move, and so on and so forth. So they do lead quite a restless life. And then they end up in, I want to say St. Petersburg, where they add another vampire to the mix. In this case, it's Alexei, who is still young. He's an artist's model, and also, it turns out, an actor. And he joins the household. So now the threesome turns into a foursome, except for Constanta. She's kind of reticent because she feels that he's very young. And although she still looks young, I mean, she hasn't aged a day, she just feels that the age gap, and we're now talking round about 500 years, because she was turned at the beginning of the 14th century, let's say 1330, and now we're talking post-revolutionary Russia, so that's 600 years almost. So the age gap mentally to her is too wide for her to actually consider him anything but her son. They do have sex later, but I think that's, in general, she just does not consider him a lover. Whereas Magdalena, of course, being much younger than she, much younger than she, does fall in love with Alexei. And at some point, the whole family collapses, because he's becoming more and more controlling, and they are losing more and more their ability to assert themselves. Alexei certainly is a very rebellious element that comes in, and they retire to the French countryside to be safe. And one day, he drains someone and is discovered. And the villagers basically band together and try to storm the French mansion that they live in. And Constanta decides that now is a good time to rid themselves of this man once and for all. She has been reading about how he can be destroyed, and driving a stake through his heart is, the easiest way of doing it. Well, not that it's easy, but that's the way that she could imagine doing it. they lure him into his bedchamber, or into their bedchamber, I should say, and basically pretend that they want to have sex with him to make up, because there's been quarreling going on. And she drives a stake through his heart. They all drink from him, so basically imbibe his power. And then she says, okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to present the body to the villagers outside, but then we have to run because otherwise they will cut us down as well. So she hoists up her husband, takes him downstairs, takes him outside, drops the body down in front of the villagers. They just rush towards the body, start, like tearing it apart, cut off his head, and the three of them run. And then there's a cut, and it's time for them to part ways. And Alexei goes to the United States to become an actor on the stage, and and Magdalena goes to Italy to study politics at university, and Constanta, well, she travels Europe. And she's then basically saying, I'm going to have my own immortal family, and it's not going to be a locked room, it's not going to be a locked house, and it's not going to be coercion, but it's going to be free. And that's the end of the book. And I have to say, it's a well-written book. The style and the language is really, really well chosen for the subject matter, because it's written in a very romantic style. It's a little bit reminiscent of Gothic novels, like, let's say, Anne Radcliffe. So she is trying to, and she is succeeding in, not only trying to, but succeeding in providing the right mode and the right means of transmitting the story in such a way that you would believe this was written by somebody from the 15th, 14th century telling her story. And it's a short story. I mean, the novel itself is around 200 and something pages. This one also contains a short story which is written after the fall of the vampire, after the murder, or whatever you want to call it. It's written in the first person, and Constanta writes about herself and everybody else in the first person. The other one is then written from the point of view of, the short story is written from the point of view of Alexei, which didn't really, I mean, I only read parts of it because I didn't really care about it. For me, the story ended where the novel ended. I didn't need an additional short story around it, so I only read like 2 or 3 pages and then I stopped. So I don't know what is part of this story, but I really didn't care, because for me, this was the book that told the story of the wives of, and it's not Dracula, although the Harkers do make an appearance, because Dracula, of course, is based on Vlad Tepes, and he is a Romanian warlord who lived in the 15th century, I want to say. So if this guy lived through the plague in Athens before Christ, then he can't be Dracula, so we will not call him that. But the Harkers do make an appearance. They're referred to as a Victorian couple that caused trouble, which is kind of true. They did, for Dracula at least. So I really liked it. I think it's also a very quick read. You can sit down and read this really quickly. It's a nice take on the vampire story. It tells a really nice story about vampires and about also what it means to be immortal, in terms of, the boredom that comes with immortality, because, everything there is nothing new anymore. And for example, Magdalena also falls into what I would consider complete depression over time, and she really doesn't get up anymore, she doesn't eat anymore, because she's just simply bored stiff. And this immortality combined with this toxic relationship, which keeps you inside, which keeps you locked up, leads to her locking herself away. And I thought that this was a very interesting take on things. I would definitely recommend it. And it is an interesting book. I wouldn't be kind of like saying it's a book that would be my, take to the desert island list book, but for what it is, I can really recommend it. I'm not sure if this is a first book, because I've also got The Robber Girl somewhere, which I have in an independently published version. So I don't know if this was her first book and then came this, but she's also written another book which does seem to be dark academia. I'm not sure if I would read it, but if you're interested in a female vampire story that tells of what it's like to be, I guess, of becoming a vampire and then emancipating yourself from your sire, then this is definitely your book. I will say that there's a lot of trigger warnings at the beginning, so you might want to check them out. There is, of course, blood and gore and killing people. There is definitely gaslighting. There's definitely controlling relationships in there. But yeah, this is what the book is about. So if any of these trigger you, then you should definitely not read the book, because you cannot even skip them, because they're omnipresent, because this is what this book is about. It's about a very dysfunctional family where someone basically then takes matters into her own hands and decides to kill her tormentor and get rid of him. And in a way, the book is her way of apologizing. No, not apologizing, but explaining, possibly even to herself, and rationalizing why she did it and why it was the right thing to do. And she also expresses the sentiment at some point that she says that if there's still something left of him, if there's still some kind of essence that lingers, she would hope that in a way he understands that this was the right thing to do and that he approves of the way they live now. Yeah, I don't know if he would, because I don't think he would. I think he felt utterly betrayed by them, and I don't think he would forgive, but it's wishful thinking, I guess. So this is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. It's also available in German. This is the English version, and it's also a really beautiful version. I really like the cover with this kind of like glittering and reflecting surface, and it's also got this soft touch surface to it, so it's a really, really nice edition as well, and it was published by Orbit Books. Soon, and thank you.